Warm welcome to everybody. For those of you who haven't been with to our Blomo Blockchain Monday, just a brief introduction. My name is Moritz Schild. I'm one of the founders and board members of Hanseatic Blockchain Institute. We are an institution here in Hamburg, Germany, that was founded about 3 years ago with the intention to, first of all, ease and support networking within the group of people that's interested in blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. And then secondly, try to inject the virus of blockchain to these that have not yet heard about it, to spread the word and talk about it. And Blockchain Monday, the event we have today, is one amongst a series of other things which we use in order to help understand blockchain technology, to spread the word and to introduce to new interesting projects. And we have done this in the past as physical events here in Hamburg, which was quite nice because it was permitting networking afterwards and having a beer together. And under COVID conditions, we moved to a virtual format, which works quite well as well. However, the advantage is that it offers the opportunity to have speakers and guests invited from different locations, and we have people from London, from Paris, from Tel Aviv, and from Moscow within the last couple of months, and today from Berlin, which more and more moves into a blockchain hub in Europe, at least, which I think is quite nice. Over the course of the most recent Blomos, we have been quite active looking into NFTs, looking into metaverse, because I think this is one of the core trends we have seen, and much of it was about commercializing NFTs and metaverse. And I'm quite happy that today we are looking into, from my point of view, the most challenging area for a new developments, which is revolutionizing social media, because social media is much more driven by customer preferences and trying to focus on them and trying to give additional incentive to use the new network is quite challenging from my point of view. Before I move to our guest today, just a brief remark, as we are an association, a German Verein. It's possible for all of you who have not yet signed up to become a member of our Verein to do so, and that's particularly cool in the beginning of a year, because the total payment for an individual is 50 euros per year. And so you get the most out of being a member if you start early in a year. Please feel free to look at our webpage, www.blockchaininstitute.eu. Perfect, Jan, thank you very much. To become a member. In addition, what not so many people know is that we are more and more active in using our YouTube channel, and more or less 30 or even 40 of our past Blockchain Mondays with many quite interesting guests are now available online, and I think there's quite a bunch of things that are quite cool to look if you have missed them. Having said that, I would love to move to our guest, who's Madeleine. I asked you, Madeleine. No. Once again, give me your name.
Madeleine.
Madeleine. Okay, Madeleine Parker. Madeleine, where do you come from originally?
Originally from just outside of London.
All right. Okay. But you have been all over Europe, and you studied in Bologna, in Hamburg, in Frankfurt, and in London, if I see correctly, and in Italy as well. And I think, apart from me giving an introduction to you, maybe it's more helpful if you just tell us briefly who you are and what made you get into this blockchain, crypto, and Web 3.0 space.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Moritz. So really nice to be here today. I hope to give some insights and then have a good discussion around the social 3. So for myself, I've been basically looking at how could we have applications of blockchain for quite some years. So back when I was studying at UCL, I was involved there in some of the sort of entrepreneurship events that they would run alongside my degree, which was mostly actually in social sciences and cultural studies, including art and fashion. So I had a bit of a mix of interest across the technology side, but also across the, let's say, social science side of things. And I was really interested in what I was seeing at that time in London in blockchain, and especially in the creative industries at that point, that we were seeing it for sustainability use cases. But at the same time, a lot of the depth of the technology was not being explored in the industries that I was interested in. And especially as a young person, I was very interested to see how this could bring a lot of opportunity for the purpose of equality, for really impacting people's lives worldwide. So I tried to go much deeper into this and get a better understanding technically of blockchain. And I've basically been working as well on different applications. So when I came to Berlin a few years ago, this was a thriving hub at that time for blockchain, and I very much hope that it will stay this way. And was basically going into my master's studies, which got me some opportunities to connect not only with startups, but also with corporate. So I was with KPMG and also a large global impact organization for world food security, and seeing different applications across those two from both a corporate side and from a public and private sector side was very interesting. But at the same time, it was a little bit far behind what was happening in the startup world. So I was very interested to see the two, and I actually worked on establishing an entrepreneurship center in Berlin at the business school here, and was bringing together different players and getting to understand the ecosystem and to see what are the next waves of blockchain beyond sort of the institutional side, what was coming up there. And that's when I met some other founders who were from Europe and started to get involved with the projects that I'm now currently involved in.
Yeah, cool. The projects are, I mean, there are different projects. I think it started initially with New Life, and then it merged, or you added the new coin, or maybe you can give us some background how these different brands and what the system is before we dig into the details.
Yeah. So that's correct. There is sort of the horizontal layer of the blockchain, and then there's different vertical applications on top of that. So we started to build out a few years ago already. In 2019, we launched the first version of New Life, which is a attempt for a decentralized social network. So we've started this, and we already have users worldwide, and it's been featured in a lot of magazines such as Dazed, Paper, Vice, The Times UK, Cointelegraph, etc. And we're testing there and experimenting with our users on different mechanisms for things such as NFTs, or in the future DAOs. But a large part of this application was also thinking about how can users have more control of their data in future, and what will be the impact on the economy in terms of industry sectors that would interact with those types of users. So we were also sort of scouted by Farfetch, so a company from Portugal, headquartered in London now, who are sort of the luxury Zalando, and they basically recognize that we would be a potential disruptor, both in blockchain and also for the types of users and customers that they have. And so we worked on their accelerate. We were part of that accelerator program almost 2 years ago now, connecting with a lot of executives of luxury groups who are trying to, at that time, understand what would be the impact of blockchain in their business. So flash forwards 2 years now, we start to see a lot of those players actually coming into the space. And in that meantime, for us, we've not only been establishing the New Life app, but we've also been working out a much bigger vision for other people to also build what we call the future of social 3.0. So this is where New Coin Protocol comes in. So New Life is currently one of the first apps testing and integrating with New Coin Protocol, which is now live in testnet. It's going through a lot of sort of testing and auditing, but we already have a pipeline of over 30 entrepreneurs and applications to actually build on top of this technology. So I can tell you more. I prepared a presentation to go through sort of the history of all of that in much more detail, but at a high level, there's sort of an application as an example towards an ecosystem who'll be able to leverage those advanced blockchain, scalable and cheap solutions.
For those of our attendees who who are not yet members of New Life, what are the three kind of core differences or advantages versus using a traditional social network, the Facebook or whatever one would take as a traditional social network? So if you like, you can share. So if you have a short presentation, don't. Would be interesting to just get a flavor of how it looks like. Yeah. Definitely. I can run through, as I understood, it was like first a presentation and then some questions. So I'm happy to do that. In terms of the demographic of New Life, we target like a very early niche of early adopters. So we tend to have users who are coming out of different fashion art schools worldwide. They read cultural press, arts press. Maybe they are working also in the fashion industry, in the luxury sector. So some of them are upcoming talents and some of them are established talents, such as founders of very high profile cultural magazines or brands, and also some celebrities within this sort of cultural niche. But I mean, this is a cool crowd, but why are they moving into New Life? What's the difference? So the first thing has really been the peer network effect. So the quality of people that we've already had there, also from the founding team's background and connections, that we originally built a community before we built an app. So this attracted the first group of people and we kept it as invite only. So similar to something that Clubhouse has later used. We kept that so that people would really appreciate the fact that they would find like-minded and relevant people to them. So we kept it with invite only. We then started to get all this organic press, which brought in a lot of people in the right niche. And we've kept it very close-knit since, where we limit actually the amount of content people can upload, and we limit the amount of invites that you have so that people actually share high-quality content. And they almost have this sort of FOMO of what's there, I need to see this stuff, but it's more in a collaborative way. So one of the biggest feedbacks that I get when I'm talking to our user base and a community is that they appreciate that this app is actually very minimalist. It's not attention driven, and the algorithm is set to suggest relevant content for them. And they can actually express themselves in an environment that's not based on social clout, but is actually based on the quality of the curation and the quality of the creativity and community. Okay, quality sounds good, but how does quality relate to Web 3.0? Is there an annex, a connection between the technology and the quality? Yeah, absolutely. One of the main things that is kind of broken in the whole system is the fact that it's very difficult because engagement doesn't equal quality. So if you have a huge amount of data available and your end goal is to optimize for eyeballs on your screen, how can you actually ever have quality as your biggest output? So in a network like New Life, where its goal is creative coordination, how can we find the most valued creativity? How can we get people to coordinate and collaborate on ideas or new aesthetic trends? The metric is very different. So I could start to share my screen and go through sort of a first presentation, and then we could go back to it. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. And please, everybody who has questions, feel free. We want to have this as interactive as possible, but I think you can share. Yeah, perfect. Mm-hmm. Okay, so to kind of give like a much broader background to what we're doing, why do we need Social 3.0? So the big claim, and I don't think anyone who's seen the news in the last year or two will disagree, is that we have serious challenges with our current social media networks that are owned by very few and cause and interact with a lot of very real world problems.
to do with our data, to do with market mechanisms, with all the stuff that's happening around antitrust right now, to do with the opaqueness of the fact that it's a centralized company owning so much personal data. And also then a bigger output is what is happening when it comes to the big AI race. So we have here so many different topics thrown into one, and they all kind of come from some very basic challenges, which is the fact that there's a centralized entity here owning so much data, and it becomes increasingly hard to regulate it and increasingly hard to have these sort of market mechanisms where innovation is actually possible, because the data is siloed and the UI is controlled predominantly by very few tech companies today. So if we kind of think about all the things we're seeing in the press, there's multiple ways that that's manifesting, political, to do with mental health. It's nothing that's unfamiliar to this audience, I'm sure, to see the sort of challenges we have. But as you said, Moritz, is probably one of the hardest problems to actually solve. We can try to solve it by regulating the existing option, but how would we actually reinvent the system if we could? So it kind of comes down to some core design principles that we need to have in mind when we're doing this. And one of them that I take personally very, very much to heart is that everyone who is using a platform deserves to know how it works. And that's really a core principle of Web3, is that we have this transparency and we have the ability to audit and see and use data as more of a community-driven approach. So the thing that is fueling this is really the ad model as a business, because this is, you know, how the internet is run today, first and foremost. And it's really something that is perhaps going to have its Nokia moment, where if that's really your one source of revenue, Web3 is really going to be something to pay attention to, because it entirely disrupts this model of engagement. And increasingly, we're waking up to seeing those devastating effects and realizing that if the product is for free, then you are the product. There's a lot of really great thinkers, experts who have come out of major tech companies who are also proposing some serious opportunities for this. Also, for example, Tim Berners-Lee's project with Solid, they're looking at how to, not only for social media, but how to basically have this more open source approach to how we structure data on the internet as an infrastructure. But the question ultimately, if you're going to have any kind of data source and you're trying to build that up towards something, it's what are you optimizing for? And right now we're optimizing for engagement and we're optimizing for ad revenue. We're not optimizing for some maybe more noble goals or for this sort of impact that could really happen if people were treated as human beings with real potential rather than people to target and sell things to. So this is really something that has spread globally in the last years, and we're really all aware of the fact that we need to really take this seriously now and put not only the responsibility on governments to solve this, but also on entrepreneurs and the communities to build up new alternatives, let's say. So when it comes down to it, the kind of, let's say, criteria we need to have is that we need to have open, auditable, and a sharing of value in the new networks that we build for Social 3.0. And again, it comes down to changing this equation of engagement versus quality. And engagement may be something that sticks around because it does provide a tremendous amount of economic value, but it's not the only opportunity of how we can run the internet. If we're able to actually align people around ideas, and instead of having results being displayed to us or content being displayed to us based on what's going to most catch our attention, but what's most relevant to our goals or ideas, and we can actually create financial incentives to get to that, the potential of social applications for the future are actually very constructive towards society. And it comes down to some very fundamental principles in economics where it's actually all about the value creation. And right now we have an economy of rents. And this is being perpetuated like crazy by the financial system. And ultimately, the people who create the most amount of value in society have not been the ones who have necessarily profited from it, from the current economic theories and infrastructures that we have today. So what happens, there's a really interesting researcher from UCL who I follow very closely looking into this, called Mariana Mazzucato. And she's actually evaluated social networks in this context. And she wrote a book called The Value of Everything, which I recommend to everyone here to read. And it basically is not even about blockchain, it's not even about Web3, but it explains the very principles of how we've ended up in an extractive, rent-driven economy. And what could actually happen differently is putting, again, the option of value creation natively on the internet. So I will just keep going. If anyone has questions or wants to respond to something, please let me know, Moritz, from the chat. But ultimately, something that my generation especially is incredibly vocal about is impact and equality. And so we really have to look now with a fresh mind about, if the internet is one of the things that has changed society the most in the last years, how could we even use that for a tool to really create systems that enable people all over the world to have opportunities they would never have before? We've seen this, and I'm grateful for those social 2.0 platforms that have connected us more, but they have not connected us at the level of value creation. So here's a little screenshot from two people. So obviously we're all familiar with the anonymous Satoshi, but perhaps some people here aren't familiar so much with the second person who's at the top here. So this is an engineer and an entrepreneur called Dan Larimer. And he's actually one of the people who greatly has inspired the new coin protocol. And we're building actually a lot on top of his designs and engineering. And so what Dan Larimer did that is very important in the history of where we are now with blockchain is to actually invent and showcase what can happen with social media. So in his design principles for delegated proof of stake, which is something we can touch on in a second, it's the consensus mechanism to run the EOSIO blockchain. And he essentially recognized very early on that, as you can see from even 2010, that we need actually very scalable solutions, because at the end of the day, we need to have these applications that can run much faster. So although we've benefited a lot from the outbreak from Ethereum in particular, when it comes to actual applications that have been built on chain, there's still huge issues with scalability, with feasibility, and the types of applications we see and interact within the Ethereum network have ultimately suffered from that lack of scalability. So what Dan Larimer has actually been one of the key sort of engineers behind creating is the opportunity to see this technology from an application perspective. So we've gone through all of these different layers, straight from the beginning of Bitcoin through to now general purpose blockchains. And we're starting to get to this application area with NFTs, DeFi, DAOs, and dApps that are coming through. But really the next wave is what's actually relevant to the everyday market, the everyday user, and the everyday person. So we need for that this scale, efficiency, and a focus on the actual markets and getting this value creation distributed effectively to the people who actually create the value. So there's different mechanisms we've seen to get through this sort of history of blockchain, from proof of work to proof of stake, and now variations of proof of stake, which are incredibly well adopted already, and is sort of where the main focus of innovation is in order to get us to this next wave of applications on the internet. So you may be familiar with Tezos, for example, which is running on this liquid proof of stake. Polkadot is running on nominated proof of stake, and EOSIO is on delegated proof of stake. So there's every version of proof of stake emerging, and there's many different benefits from all of them. And these I've kind of highlighted. I find these very relevant outcomes of Web3 so far that enable us to now get to the next stage of social 3.0 coming out and creating interactions between these. So Steemit here is noticeable. It's the first social blockchain application, and it actually was running live and continues with a community of people on a decentralized social network. But from social 2 to social 3 is actually a huge leap, and anyone taking this on is not doing it lightly, I can assure you. And some of the main things that we have to consider when we're doing that leap from the old to the new social 3.0 is actually what is the sort of modularity and the composability between the different layers of the applications themselves. So not actually the blockchain, but more the application layer. So with centralized social platforms, we have an infrastructure where the UI, the algorithm, and the database is all owned and controlled by a central entity.
I think there's one question just for better understanding. Risa is asking, so what do you mean exactly with value? Is value in this context content? Is it news? Is it money? Is it information? Value creation.
Mm-hmm. So there's a great question with a very abstract answer to follow it. So value is really, I mean, it can be everything from producing technology to entertaining a crowd to offering loans so people can create and build more. It's really something that is coming from the very beginning of the value chain. So in whatever series it is, I'm talking about the beginning of the value chain. If you think about it in agriculture, as one blockchain project I was engaged with, they were looking at how can we basically distribute the money that is earned across the entire value chain in agriculture back to the farmers, and how could we actually invest at that early point so that we can have a higher yield of crops, and then the entire chain is creating more value. So there's numerous ways you can think of it, but that project, so it's an international project, taught me a lot about ways to think of the blockchain. If you can actually create more data points and more sort of incubation for the people at the beginning of any value chain, then you can you can optimize it. So I hope that, is there any follow-up question on this?
No, I trust that's sufficient. May I add, because I mean, the question who owns what is value creation, who owns the content, and who gets rewards for it. One of the first projects I met in the context of social media and Web 3.0 was the German Apix project, and they started saying, well, it's unfair that someone who's sharing pictures or whatever on Facebook, for example, is not just getting likes and is not being rewarded, and it's Facebook's a company that gets the rewards because people like it and see the ads and so on. So to what extent is New Life based on the idea that the creator who shares something on your network is getting a kind of financial compensation or getting something in exchange for what he's sharing? And is that a basic part of it, or is it much more that everybody is just a co-owner of the platform?
So actually the two completely merge in the New Life application and can merge for people building on the blockchain. So what I mean by that is the very design principle and the sort of passion from the team as well is that creators need to be empowered, and that creators are the ones who are going to change and influence the economy. And so we're moving from a very much industrial economy to the creative, decentralized economy, meaning that if you want to think about what is going to create the most value and what is going to have in the end the highest, in some sense, productivity, it's the intellectual property. It's the creative idea of humans, because we're going towards automation, and we're going towards the fact that a lot of jobs will no longer be relevant for us. And the thing that makes humans distinctive from machines is our creativity. And so this is a much bigger macro trend that we design our technologies around, is that the IP is going to be the thing that runs the economy, especially from the internet first approach. So it's been previously sort of the end mile optimization. How fast can we advertise to you? How fast can we ship to you? But what about the beginning of the process in the first mile, where you actually even know what people want to buy and what you should even be producing? So if you see that bigger trend happening and emerging, you come to realize that it's the creators who need new models to monetize their IP. And so a lot of the economy is actually run by fashion, and it's because it's a lifestyle-driven economy, and cultures happen and then they get followed, and they tend to affect things on a very progressive basis. If you look at the hipster, for example, now Starbucks is basically a manifestation of hipster, but this was a trend that was created by one guy, and he changed an entire generation of companies with the hipster. And so although it may not be so obvious day to day, culture and fashion actually play a huge role on the entire economy. And so if you can actually create technologies and platforms that empower those creators to earn from the value they create, then you can actually optimize. So one of the things with New Life that we're looking at is how can we create here shown on my screen. So basically what we do is we use NuCoin protocol increasingly to become an open source database. So users control their assets, and they can basically plug themselves in and out of different applications. The algorithms remain somewhat private from whichever company is running the interface, because it can be very hard to do that in a fair way when people can then sort of play the algorithm. So especially if your platform becomes a monetization of content platform and you publicly display the entire algorithm, you can actually end up not playing fair to everyone. So the UI level is what is the experience around that. And so between the UI and the AI level, that's where the community get to vote. We're looking at a lot of DAO mechanisms for community voting on what should happen. And the database level will increasingly be at the blockchain level. So with New Life exploring all of these things, and we're also making a lot of tooling, open source tooling for other people to do the same.
Okay, but I mean, I buy the idea of fostering creativity, and that creating things and generating IP is a very relevant value creation process. However, and this is in line with the question Maggie is just asking, does it necessarily mean that I need to share the IP, the ideas I've generated on a platform and make it so public to everybody? Because I mean, there's always a risk of my ideas, my creativities being stolen if I share them on a platform. So
this is something we looked into a lot with New Life, and just because it's on a public blockchain doesn't mean that it's open. So if it's on a public blockchain, you have a private key and you basically control the access and who can actually see the content. When it comes to the features that you can then build around that as a platform, so at this UI level here, you can create different things on the front side. So for example, if you go on New Life, you'll be able to upload your content and turn it into an NFT. So this NFT can either be tradable or non-tradable, depending on the user and how verified they are as well.
If you already, sorry for interrupting you. This to share something which sounds as easy as sharing a picture on Facebook, and kind of minting an NFT out of it is already part of the the existing tech of New Life, right?
Yes. So we have a live app, we have users, and what we're doing now with the new beta that we're testing is exactly these NFT opportunities for users' content. So that's something that is already in testing on the the new coin testnet. And we're experimenting with our users based on the subtleties of the types of things they want to do from their user journey. So for example, a lot of our creators want to work with other people publicly because they want to curate different works and they want to get recognized for their own work and for their curation. So this can be shared on the New Life social network and other people can see it. But other creators want to actually work more privately. So they only want to show the visual of that content, actually share the content, not just keep a record of it privately. So they want to just have it in their own sort of Google Drive, let's say. Other people then want to invite people privately to that. So we're working on lots of different mechanisms in terms of how the content is displayed and how the content is recorded. But those are two very much separate things, which is why here it shows the UI is different from the database. So that's all up to the user, and their data can travel with them on their own blockchain profile.
So is your network already close to metaverse, or is it heading in a different direction, or is it something that you would describe as being already part of a metaverse?
So it really depends on the definition, because from the New Life perspective, we don't have any sort of AR 3D environments. And this is something that we would do with partners if we wanted to offer users to be able to do that from their profile, for example. This is not some technology that we build in the company, but it's something that is relevant to our user base. Then in terms of the ecosystem for the new coin protocol, there are many metaverse applications who are looking to interact with the NFT smart contracts and the sort of DAO mechanisms, etc. So that there from the ecosystem, there's already a lot of opportunities for creators and for brands and for communities to use metaverse technologies, while we don't specialize in that. And when I say it depends on what you call the metaverse, it's because I strongly agree with something that Jamie Burke actually said from Outlier Ventures, that the metaverse is first and foremost an economic system. So don't get fooled by the UX of the 3D and all the promotions we see from those grand advertisements. But it's ultimately an economic system. And so that's the role we play as the protocol, is to actually enable a more meritocratic and distributed economics to keep the metaverse decentralized and not keeping all of your insane data stored in one company. And seeing some patents that have recently come out personally terrify me about that.
Okay, got it. You mentioned quality earlier on, and to some extent one could argue that in order to ensure that a quality level which is related to the quality of participants, but as well to the quality of the interaction, to the netiquette and the way you ensure that there's no inappropriate language and so on, that all these things that are problems of social networks can be handled in a centralized organization where someone is responsible and sets rules and so on. In a DAO, I think that's much more difficult to establish common standards and to ensure that the network or the participants do not develop things that are, well, inappropriate, for example, or not social acceptable. Do you have a way to handle that?
Yeah, so looking again at this sort of diagram, none of those responsibilities change if you are ultimately sort of like a centralized company running an application. So there's a lot of legal requirements for people to be able to report inappropriate content or copyright infringements, etc. And none of those responsibilities change if you build in a centralized way on top of decentralized mechanisms. In terms of what's responsible then at the blockchain layer or for a DAO layer, That's very open to debate and change what happens, because ultimately no one entity or one person is then responsible for this. But in terms of the account and the tokenomics, you can heavily disincentivize against this. So content moderation is a huge part of what New Coin Protocol is also looking into, to do with basically how do you create sustainable decentralized governance models to make sure that the people who vote on the changes in the network are people who provide the most value for it. So this is a concept I think would be good to kind of briefly highlight. The new architecture for Web3 that we're building. So I can kind of tie back into that, but essentially we're getting to a point where we've had a history of apps, decentralized apps being built, because the blockchain layer ones have been very nascent, and we've then had layer twos, etc., trying to create scalability. But ultimately, very early on, what we had was a lot of fragmentation in the fact that in order to run a DApp, you need to have independent smart contracts to connect to your virtual machine. And so there's a lot of possibilities for errors. There's a lot of lack of composability, and this is like a really big problem to actually get to even have the problem of content moderation issues. You need to first have apps that work. So we then had this kind of era, which we're still sort of in, where basically we're able to have some level of interoperability within certain networks, and there's increased tooling. But now what we need to go through is actually putting into kind of the core these blockchain smart contracts and enabling interoperability at the application layer, so that we can actually build apps that have high amounts of content in the first place. And so this is what we're focusing on, is how do we actually simplify the blockchain for people to build applications on top of. So a few ways that we're doing this is that we have an SDK for any language to trigger basically a series of smart contracts. So anyone who would like to build on top of New Coin Protocol will not need to have blockchain developer experience, will not need to be building their own smart contracts, do not need to build their own blockchain or to have a side chain of any sort. Instead, we open it up to the 14.5 million JavaScript developers in the world. So now we actually can get to the point where we have serious contenders to even make these applications to have problems with. So that's kind of the point we're at, where we have actually this SDK on GitHub, so people can start to interact with it, provide feedback to the team, and start to build different applications on top of it. And so it could be any applications that are run in React, JavaScript, Unreal Engine, or Unity, for example. So this is what's available with New Coin Protocol. And some of the things that you were touching on, Moritz, I can kind of now explain with that context. So we're moving from this centralized coordination to decentralized coordination. And we say the word coordination 1 million times over every day, because it's such an important part of how we get to this next layer of applications and build human-centric and interoperable, composable applications. And so this brings me to like the whole deeper point of New Coin Protocol, and it touches on explaining the moderation, content moderation part. So at the core of everything, we said engagement and quality did not align. And that was a problem of the potential we had from our current social networks. And so what we're focused on a lot is creative value discovery, because this is everywhere. It can be how good is a startup, how good is a piece of artwork, how good is a talent in a company, for example. You could apply this phrase, creative value discovery, to so many different things all around the world. And so this is kind of it's just a screenshot from a DAO, from a governance portal. And it kind of highlights just the basic principles, the fact that communities can vote, but some of the biggest problems are how do you actually weigh in those votes right now? And how do you do it in a way that reflects the quality of the network? So if everybody could just buy in, then the people with the deepest pockets would have the most control over a network. But that doesn't lead to assuring that the quality can actually stay. Instead, we're working on a new type of consensus mechanism, which is a variation of delegated proof of stake that we call proof of creativity. And the core design principles behind proof of creativity are that essentially the people who create the most value in the network are the ones who have the highest voting power over who are the validators of the network. So it makes it much harder to kind of buy a system, and it makes it also much lower in consumption because we're not using proof of work. It's still at the level of proof of stake, delegated proof of stake. And it's again an iteration on top of that to solve this problem of who gets to say what, who gets to decide, who gets to vote, whether it's good or bad, whether it's good content or whether it's content that needs to be removed. So yeah, I will just read this directly, so I think it's the best explanation. So unlike proof of stake or delegated proof of stake, the proof of creativity consensus algorithm enables social media profiles to vote based on the amount staked into their DAO. It means that the more a creator, application, game, or community is valued by its patrons, the more weight they have in the chain governance. And so this is some breakthrough that we've seen a lot of leaders in the space talking about. There's a lot of people talking about social coming next in blockchain, and they're all addressing the same problems that we're talking about. For example, Vitalik here, Chris Dixon from A16. And this mechanism, combined with the fact that it's easy to build on the chain, we hope will be something that really realizes social 3. So we can go from the beginning dApps to hopefully the sort of iPhone amazing level of dApps. We probably don't even need to be calling them dApps anymore. And so we go from this system of a lot of fragmentation. It's hard to understand the moderating, who's in control, why are they in control, etc., to a system where there's easy access to blockchain smart contracts that are standardized, that a lot of different people can build on and actually spend their time and resources on answering those questions. The quality of blockchain applications that we see today is still extremely low to what's going to come in the next 20 years. And until we solve this problem and this actually gets implemented, we don't have the time or resources to answer those difficult questions. So this is what we focus on. We're very passionate about also getting feedback, and I'd love to have a lot of questions about this. I can just finish off to show you a couple of slides on New Life as people were interested in seeing what we have already. So you can actually download the first version of New Life on iOS right now. And if you join our Telegram community from the newlife.io website, you'll be able to be involved in the beta group for a lot of the features that we're doing. But it's available to download. We've been featured, as I said, in a lot of these press, and we focus a lot on the creator community because you can't disrupt if you don't have a niche. And these are people that we really care about and fit in line with the sort of real creative value future that we envision. So yeah, so those are a couple of companies that have accelerated us. And I think that's the end of everything that I had.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. What maybe did not come entirely across is, so how is New Life and New Coin linked together? Is New Coin just a currency that can be used on New Life, or is it the underlying token model? Or maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how these two are related. And
So New Coin Protocol is the layer 1 scalable blockchain that is decentralized and is currently in testnet. And this is open for anybody to build on top of, in the same way that Ethereum is, in the same way that Cardano will be, in the same way that Polkadot now is. And so this is a layer 1 blockchain, and New Life is one application that is using these mechanisms of New Coin Protocol the fact that we learned a lot from the market, from the users, from the use case has influenced the design principles of NuCoin to make it possible to build scalable applications such as New Life or such as other commercial game applications. And we work with very high profile advisors also from other some of the other major protocols. And there's a team there if anybody would like to know more specifically about NuCoin protocol, and anybody can download New Life on iOS right now.
Okay, but so NuCoin is a coin as well, and this can be used as a utility token, or I mean, technologically you explained, but how can it be used?
Mm-hmm.
This coin, what's the value added the coin has?
So NuCoin is both the name of the token that runs the NuCoin protocol and the name of the protocol for simplicity reasons. And it's basically, its key functions are to allow people to build and to allow governance across the protocol.
And is there a reward system within it as well, or is it just this utilizing the new coin for?
Yeah, so like any layer one, there is rewards in the sense of the incentives design that you have, because you need to design the mechanism design for it so that you don't have bad behaviors, you incentivize good behaviors, etc. So in that case, yes, there are rewards, and everything is detailed publicly on NuCoin docs. And so it's possible to dig very deep into the tokenomics of proof of creativity to see in which case different accounts and different validators are awarded and what are some of the numbers behind that. And it's exactly the same in that case as what we see with other layer one blockchains. All
right. So please, everybody who has questions or remarks or wants to contribute to our discussion, please use the chat or the Q&A function, so we can take your questions. Oh, Mark is asking, can we get invite codes?
Yeah, is it possible for me to write? Yes. Okay.
Maybe in the chat, that's the easiest.
Yeah. This is an invite code.
That's sufficient.
And as Jan kindly shared the newlife.io website, at the bottom of there is our Telegram group. So you can join there and you can get the latest updates, get support, join the beta, etc. Okay,
when we don't get any further questions, let's take a minute to look into the future. So what's the vision? Where are we going to go? I mean, a decentralized social network is likely to at some point in time replace, well, everything, the Facebook and the Snapchat and the Instagrams. Everybody will move into a decentralized social network, and what will be the relevance in our day-to-day lives of social networks? What's your expectation?
So I definitely don't think that social 2 platforms will completely collapse. I still think that they have extremely dense network effects that are hard to challenge. And I do think they also have certain use cases for certain demographics who only use social media simply to talk to people or to share updates when they're perhaps not the most social people, but they have a small community. And so why would they need or even consider changing? So I definitely think they would stay unless they get they don't enter or challenge their business model compared to the Web3 tokenomic model. So this is something that I said in the beginning is kind of anticipating a Nokia moment for several people, several players, or a blockbuster, you could also say, where basically the main problem is that too much of your revenues comes from one business model. And if that's not competitive and you can't operationally change, then that's your biggest problem. So that said, I think that when you actually have aligned interests with the entire community, and also a developer community with open source mechanisms, the amount of applications that can be built and that can challenge those platforms is not to be underestimated. In terms of, I think, also younger generations, there's a lot of pressure on centralized platforms to retain their numbers and to have the attention and to be liked even by younger generations. And so I do think that sort of the Gen Z and people who will then get the next iPhones or the next Samsung coming into social media, they will be the ones who basically determine which type of social network they want. So yeah, there's many different aspects to consider, but ultimately as a user, no one's going to use your platform if it doesn't actually provide you a simple experience and you don't get something from it. Either are the people there who you want to be with, or in this case also some sort of economic motivations for doing it.
All right. Okay, so that was kind of addressing my first question. Do you think that everybody is moving from Facebook or whatever is Web 2.0 to a decentralized world? However, Facebook has already reacted somehow and has created Meta, which you mentioned that you're currently moving into a direction. However, all these three-dimensional features and so on are not yet part of new life. And one might argue that Metaverse is offering many interesting, cool features that people might like more than the idea of being decentralized and owning their own data. So is there a competition which in the one, so from the traditional Facebook system, which has its disadvantages, and now there are two competing paths, the one being towards Metaverse, which is offering 3D, and the other one being a decentralized, which is offering more data protection and ownership and impact of the individual?
So I don't personally think that any user would change directly just because they could have better data protection or monetize their data. I am not personally convinced of this argument, but I do see it as becoming a cultural issue. And so some of the strongest things I see would be how much money and how much relevant outputs you have from research and development. And the second is, what is your cultural relevance? So if you expect Gen Z to walk into a metaverse that's not cool, that is just there because their parents or their teachers told them to go into it, of course they're not going to do it. If they're there because their friends are there and they hang out there and they have social dynamics happening, of course they'll do it. If they're there because the brands they like or the magazines they like represent it, of course they're going to follow it. Whether they will stay is a matter of probably network effects and lock-in, to be honest. And in terms of like, if there's a competition, I think the entire decentralized space is getting ready for a competition on the principle of the fact that, do we really want to have so much of our data locked up by centralized companies, and how much antitrust is happening as well? So there's also a pushback from the blockchain and Web3 communities that just out of principle, this is not the way we want to see our future and not the future we want for our families and for our kids as well.
There are a few more questions in the chat, but I would be interested to learn from your understanding, because the existing social networks intend to create monopolies, and in the Web3 world, will there be social networks with a chain interoperability so that you can connect between different social networks, or will it be a strict connection and you are either on this network or on the other one?
So I think it's going to mostly be up to the user. So a lot of people in Web3 space kind of take the principle that the user and the community get to decide. So that's why we build also on this principle that the app should be attractive enough and relevant enough for the user to want to give the app their data. So it shouldn't be just like a competition between apps. It's rather a collaboration between apps because of how users choose to show up there. So this is going to create a lot of interesting dynamics and things we've never even experienced before when it comes to also data because we've had it all, right, where suddenly third parties had everything on our data and then we realized this was wrong. So maybe there's an alternative where actually third parties can have our data as long as we can censor it and the user gets to choose for what purpose. And maybe because the user is very busy in everyday life, they choose to, follow what their friends want to do with it, or they have even like a sort of curated, I don't know, advisor or something, or a bot to choose where they should do that. But ultimately, the competition will definitely be between the centralized and decentralized. And when we see those centralized platforms coming in to offer Web3 features, remember it's Web3 features, it's not Web3 economics.
That's true. Yeah. You mentioned your proof of creativity, and I think this leads to one of the questions asking, since the creators with the most followers or patrons will be able to influence the network the most, is there a risk that they will structure it in a way that only a small group of people will again rule over the majority?
That's a very interesting question. I think the point is that you can also create your own DAOs. So if you wanted to, let's say I'm a creator or a brand, I create my own DAO. I can basically have my community come into it and they can suggest things, but at any time anyone can leave and they can also pay more attention to another DAO. So it's kind of still a choice of what does the user want, because no one's like tied into this. You still have free will to not do it, and you can give up your tokens. So there's different opportunities for people to do. And the biggest thing is that you're trying to make it best for the majority. So if you do something completely out of line with that, you're not going to be favored by the majority. So it's kind of against your incentive, but it also depends on the context.
But your project is intended to, at some point in time, be sent off to be a DAO, kind of. Is it correct to say that now you are developing it, at some point in time you intend to just let it be autonomous?
So there's different levels of that. So with NuCoin protocol, there's a lot of DAO tooling that's available for people to create their own DAOs and to have different interfaces for that as well. In terms of New Life, we're looking at essentially enabling community DAOs. So people could run them within the interface of New Life, but it's actually, on chain. So it's just a way of seeing it. And in terms of what NuCoin's potential is that actually there's a future app store model where the applications themselves can be DAOs. Now, this is very difficult in practice to pull off at the beginning because you still need to build a product and you still need to launch it. So we're in no way rushing into that, but we're strong Web3 believers. And so we want to keep as many options possible so that the application reflects what's best for the community.
It's an impressive project, and I think the vision is pretty clear. Even so, for me it's hard to really get a clear grasp on how the ultimate product, the ultimate user experience is likely to be. We got to the end of our slot, kind of. Nonetheless, we used quite a lot of technical speech and explanations and layers and so on, which makes it look at least quite complex. So if I'm going to tell my mother, who's 83, what your project is all about, what would be your brief elevator speech to an 80-year-old person to explain what you're working on and what you're building with your company?
So we are enabling creative innovators, whether they're artists, thinkers, researchers, developers, to create applications that produce real experiences for their users in a way that the users also get to control the outcome of that product. That's basically it. So we try to not control all the decisions so that it can take in the requests and offers that are given by everybody who wants to be involved in it and to actually implement them.
All right. Perfect. It was a great pleasure to have you here today. And please, everybody who has additional questions or ideas, feel free to reach out. I think we have someone mentioned that your Twitter channel is not working, so maybe you need to fix it or to check that. That's a quick remark. Yeah, we will look at it, and we are impressed by what you tend to build, and I strongly believe that the process of decentralization is something that will impact heavily how we look at social media and how we interact there. And I absolutely appreciate that there are further options for that. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for explaining the project and introducing us a little bit to New Coin and New Life. For now, everybody have a nice evening, and it was a great pleasure having you all here. Let me just briefly say that next week on the 31st, we are going to have something in German language, and we'll talk about das Phänomen der Kryptowährungen im Kontext der Forschung. Spannendes Thema, glaube ich, auf alle Fälle für nächste Woche. Having said that, tschüss, vielen Dank und eurem Projekt, your project, all the best, and have a nice week. Madeleine, thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Madeleine. Tschüss.
Tschüss.